Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be going over what a case is in the context of a case competition. And yeah, we're going to be going how you can succeed over case competitions, what they are, and some strategies that we use internationally in order to compete successfully on the international stage. So in just introducing myself, I'm James. I'm one of the co-VPs of training for the Case Competition Club, as well as a competitor on the international team. I've done a ton of case comps throughout university, but my favorite one was probably the one that I did as part of the club last year, in which it was a monitor Deloitte case competition, and we had to analyze Rona's strategy for achieving increased revenue. We don't have Alex, I think, right now, but we have Jessica, who is the co-president of the club. So maybe, Jess, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'll be subbing in for Alex. I think he's just running a bit late, but hi, everyone. My name is Jessica. I go to Ivey with James. I'm co-leading the Ivey Case Competition Club for this year, and I'm really excited to kind of host this workshop with James and allow you guys to learn more about our club.
Cool. So today's goals, we kind of have three main objectives. So the first is educating everyone on what ICCC is, and if you are coming into Western and are looking to pursue a business degree at Ivey, what are the opportunities for you? Secondly, we're going to dive into the fundamentals of case competitions, so giving you a great understanding and overview of what you should be doing. And then if we have time, we may go into some advanced tips that will allow you to stand out from the competition and really excel within any case competition. So Jess, maybe you can talk about the ICCC stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So ICCC, Ivey Case Competition Club, is based on three main pillars, as you see from the slide here: development, competition success, as well as networking. So first one with development, we host a lot of workshops, a lot of training, a lot of guidebooks and manuals to help and train our international competitors so that they develop these advanced case analysis as well as presentation skills to represent Ivey and train and compete internationally. The second one is competition success. So obviously, as we send our international members abroad, we want them to win, and we want them to represent Ivey as well as help build the reputation for ICCC. And third one is obviously networking. So we have a huge alumni database. We have alumni who've gone across the world, are working internationally, and are working everywhere. And so essentially, we want to use that alumni database as a networking tool to leverage and help increase the talent at ICCC. Perfect. And so a little bit more about ICCC. Similarly, we have individual development. So we want each of our case competitors to be well-rounded in terms of being able to do synthesize case analysis, being able to be amazing presenters and really good at talking, as well as being just overall well-rounded characters. Second one, as mentioned before, competition success, winning and representing Ivey. And third one, the networking, as well as the alumni database that we have. And this is a little bit, I guess, more of a deep dive into what those really mean. So first one, we have team training, and you'll see that if you guys go to Western or go to Ivey, we'll have public workshops for everyone to attend, similar to this one, that you'll learn more about case competitions and the ins and outs. Second one is the internal development case competitions. So we actually run our own internal case competitions for our own members. As James mentioned, one of his favorite ones was a partnership with Deloitte. So we partner with these firms, we sponsor these case comps, and we hold them for our internal members. Third one is external case competitions. So we actually, as a team, we host our annual fall as well as spring case competitions. Similarly, we partner with Deloitte, we partner with Pepsi, different firms to run exclusive networking events as well as case competitions. And finally, HBA2 membership. This is kind of a new initiative that we started, but we really want to develop a membership in which alumni can help provide advice for younger case competitor members and build the team through there. And this is just kind of a brief summary of the international competitions that we've placed and competed in. Some highlights are on the right here. We've placed at the Rotterdam School of Management. We've competed in the UW-Washington Foster School competition, as well as Northeastern and IE Business School BBA Challenge. So really exciting, and hope you guys can participate. So these are kind of some pictures of our team members who have competed internationally.
Great, thanks, Jess, for the overview of what ICCC is. So now we're going to dive into what are case competitions. Based on what Sahara was saying, a lot of you are high school students or first-year university students who may have never done a case competition before or may have no idea what they are. And so we're just going to do a quick rundown of what you can expect in both the LEAP case competition, as well as in general, any case competitions that you may come across in your high school and university careers. So ultimately, a case competition is a time-restricted, team-based activity based on a real-life business problem. So you're essentially given a brief with a situation of a specific company and generally speaking, a challenge that they're facing. And in a team, your role is to first determine the key issues that the company is facing, understand the alternatives or potential solutions that there are, and ultimately select one or two of them and persuasively present those ideas to a judging panel. And it's really important that, through this whole process, you're not just focused on creativity or out of the box ideas, but you're really looking at presenting feasible solutions that align specifically to the business's needs and wants. So overall, most case competitions generally have a set presentation structure. It's important to note that there are caveats here, and sometimes some case competitions tend to be a little wacky and require you to do other things. But in general, you kind of follow this structure in every presentation that you give. So at the start, you want to introduce your team, the problem, and provide an exec summary. An executive summary is just a broad overview of what your presentation will cover and the key decisions and recommendations that you have. The next part of your case is the key analysis. So diving a bit deeper into, what key insights did you drive based on the information that's provided, and how does that affect your recommendation and overall decisions? Then after doing that, you want to start diving into the recommendations that you present. So, it's not just saying we should do X or we should do Y, but it's also explaining why X and why Y are the best opportunities to go with. And furthermore, what this means for the business and why it's a good plan. And then finally, before question and answering and your conclusion of the presentation, you really want to dive deep into the implementation plan, which is essentially how you plan on making recommendation X or Y actually come into life. So an implementation plan generally includes some financial analysis. So figuring out, how much money is this business going to generate by doing these recommendations. Also a timeline. So how long are these recommendations going to take? And some risks and mitigations to the plan that you're kind of constructing. So in general, the most common format of case competitions, at least in the high school and undergraduate division, is 4-hour case comps. When you get to the international stage and when you do more case comps, those tend to be longer prep. But generally speaking, you have 4 hours typically to do a case. And this is just a breakdown of how you should spend that time, roughly speaking. And on the bottom half of the slide, we have different presentation components. And these are the key kind of pieces of a case competition that are important to nail in order to be successful. And so we're going to go through each of those components sequentially and, make sure that everyone has a good understanding of what those components are and what should be included in those elements. Does anyone have any questions at this point of time before we continue? Nope. Okay, perfect. So let's dive into it then. So the first part of any case competition presentation is the opening. And the opening is basically how you start your presentation. And this is really, really important for a few reasons. So first off, first impressions, especially within a case competition, are extremely important. If you come off polished and professional, it just tees up the rest of your recommendation. And the judges have this perception of your team being, smart and innovative. While a weak presentation, you have to work extra hard to kind of gain that trust and gain that reputation back through the presentation. So it's really important that you start off on a high note. And in general, there's quite a few different options that you can use for the opening of your presentation. We have some listed here, from the joke to a theoretical question to a story. Generally speaking, my favorite is usually going with the story, kind of painting the picture. Another kind of story that we tend to use is in the eyes of a consumer. So we always say, like, meet Jess. Jess is a whatever person, and she's struggling with, this, this, and this. Jess is not alone. And, that's why we're here today, to help solve the problem. That's something that you can just use. Opening should be kind of quick, tailored to the specific competition, and overall, just really, again, tee up your presentation nicely. The next part of your kind of case presentation is the problem. And so it's important to note that while in your case preparation, you're spending a lot of time trying to assess the problem and the core issues of the case. In terms of the actual presentation, the problem kind of raise is very short and sweet. It should be very clear and concise. What are your key problems that you're bringing, and what are the key problems that you're addressing? And I think, it's important to kind of stick to no more than 3 core issues, because if you kind of state 4 or 5 or any more than that, it's very hard to come up with a cohesive recommendation that solves it. Typically within these business cases, there's a lot more issues than just 3. So it's really important to figure out what are the core issues, what are the most important ones to solve, whether it being the most time sensitive, the most impactful for the business. You really want to identify those and then work off of those. And the core issues should directly be solved by your recommendation. So typically how we do it at ICCC is that we have 3 core problems that we identify, and we have 3 recommendation pieces, and each recommendation piece kind of aligns with one of the core problems. So core problem 1 is solved by recommendation 1, core problem 2 is solved by recommendation 2, core problem 3 is solved by recommendation 3. So the next part of the case is the analysis portion. So again, similar to the core issues, you're spending, I would say, quite a large chunk of your case preparation time on the analysis. Analysis basically meaning going through the case, reading it, and coming up with insights based on the information that they present. That being said, it does not make up a large portion of your presentation on its own. And as you get more experience with case competitions, your analysis should be embedded into your presentation and in that recommendation piece. So while you're going and talking through your recommendations in depth, that's the time to insert key analysis pieces and information to validate your recommendation. A general rule of thumb is that analysis should never be in your presentation just for the sake of having it. It should always link to the recommendation, and the analysis that you present should only refer to your actual solution. So in reality, you're probably going to do a lot of analysis covering a lot of different things, but don't put all of that into your presentation. It's just going to overwhelm the judges. Focus on the pieces of analysis that are only crucial to bring up in terms in relation to your recommendation. Focus on, what you're trying to present. So in general, there's also a ton of different ways in which you can kind of go about conducting analysis during the case read-through. You can use frameworks such as PEST or SWOT. PEST is kind of an external analysis marker where you evaluate different things. So PEST stands for political, environmental, social, and technological. And it's used to measure general shifts in terms of the industry that could impact your business and the situation that it stands for. So for instance, if there's a lot of political turmoil, for instance, that could be risky to enter or conduct business in a region in which is politically unstable, because regulations could be changing. There could be war, conflict that comes up that compromises your business. That's kind of how you would use PEST and come up with insights. Similarly, in terms of SWOT, so SWOT is an internal analysis that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And really it dives deep into the company itself. So, what is the company strong in? What is the company weak in? And furthermore, can we take advantage of those strengths, or do we have to shore up those weaknesses in order to compete, right? And then another really important piece of analysis is just analyzing the competitors in relativity to where you stand as a company, and figuring out if there's gaps in the market that we can kind of exploit, if there are weaknesses and capabilities that we need to shore up. All of those kind of pieces of analysis are important to conduct to get a really rich sense of what the problem is and what the context is. The key mistake that I find a lot of new case competitors making is that when they think of PEST and when we recommend SWOT, right? A lot of competitors who are new to case comps tend to just put the whole SWOT on a slide, right? Like go in the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats all together. I would not recommend that, because as to my point earlier, you should only be keeping and putting in the points of analysis that are relevant, right? So while maybe the company has a strength in manufacturing, if your recommendation does not talk about manufacturing, you shouldn't have it and you shouldn't be speaking about it. So when using these frameworks, make sure that you are only picking and putting in the pieces of information and the parts of the framework that are relevant. Don't just slap the whole framework in just because we told you to put a framework in. Does anyone have any questions up to this point? I know I've been talking for a lot. Nope. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Oh. Okay, great. So the next part of the kind of piece of the presentation is decision criteria. So essentially up to this point in the presentation, you've laid out your opening, you've, given an exec summary, which will show you what it looks like later, and you've gone into some analysis about the opportunities. The next thing that you want to start doing is evaluating the recommendations and determining a distinct list of criteria that you're going to evaluate the recommendations based off of. So what this looks like is, something that we have here. So essentially, this was from a past case that ICCC competed in and won. And we had kind of 5 core criteria that we used to evaluate regions. In this case, one of the decision pieces was which region to go into. And so basically, you kind of take your data points, you take the different recommendations, and you assign like a weighting to them. And then you kind of just calculate it up, and the option that looks the best is the one that you go with. It's pretty simple, but coming up with distinct decision criteria is very, very important because it's a very clear way to communicate to the judges how you determined the best solution, right? If we didn't have this decision criteria, the judges would be probably very confused to why we selected the Middle East as the region of choice. And so having a decision criteria is almost a way to like quantify your decisions and ensure that it's very clear about why you're making the decisions and what factors led to that. So yeah, the exec summary. So the exec summary, again, goes at the start of your presentation, right after the opening and the core problem analysis. And essentially what you're doing is you're front loading your decision and you're front loading your recommendation so that the judges are very clear to what you are choosing and why. So in general, when doing an exec summary, it's really important to tie the core solutions or core problems to core solutions, as I mentioned before. Another thing that kind of you can use to be a little bit creative and flashy is to kind of make your recommendation an acronym. So, you can say introducing Project ACE, and A stands for the first recommendation, C stands for the second recommendation, E stands for the third recommendation. The other thing is that when you're explaining and going through your recommendations, it's really helpful to have this exec summary at the start because it allows you to clearly divide between your distinct recommendations so the judges can follow along. And then the final part of the exec summary is just what is the overall outcome. So kind of just giving a high level view of what is the impact if you were to implement this recommendation. And it kind of looks like this. So this is a very stock standard exec summary page that you would put again at the start of your presentation. You kind of have the core key question that is asked of you for the case. You have your 3 core issues within the respective company. And then you have your recommendation. In this case, it's called scale up, which was just a catchy way to kind of frame a recommendation. And then again, at the bottom, you have the impact. So we have bank accounts being created, we have money being generated, and we have market being captured. Does that make sense? It's just a really nice way to digest a lot of information into one page. Cool. So the next part of it is the recommendation itself. So, this is, I would say, the meat and potatoes of the case competition. It's where the judges will be paying attention most because this is where you're able to combine creativity skills plus analytical skills and package them nicely into a few recommendations that you present to your judges. So there are kind of 4 key elements of making sure your recommendations are strong. The first is to sell it, right? Your job as competitors is to sell these ideas to your judges and make them believe that your ideas are better than the ideas of other people that they're pitching. And so it's really important that you're framing things in a positive way, that you're, communicating why this recommendation is the best. The second part is, again, make sure your recommendations tie to your problems. A case competition should feel like a story. While there's all these individual pieces and parts, it should all flow through very nicely. And in a presentation, it should be very clear how everything aligns and connects. So make sure your recommendations directly solve the core issues that you kind of present at the start. The third point, which I talked about earlier, is to incorporate key points of your analysis into the recommendation itself. So for example, if you are pitching that we should launch a new product, right? And you have a specific product in mind, you kind of say that at the start and then dive into the analysis that led you to make that decision and reinforce why it's a good thing. And then finally, each recommendation should have some quantification. So you should be able to measure the impact of this recommendation, either through sales or through customer acquisition or through market share. Use any metrics that you like, but just kind of find a way to quantify it because judges love to see the impact on paper, not just you kind of talking about the impact. And in general, we've also outlined here a recommendation structure that you can use. So for each recommendation, it's really important that you first explain what the recommendation is on a high level detail, then go deeper into the nitty gritty of it. So, what would be involved in this recommendation, what needs to be happened, how will this affect consumers, how will this affect competitors? Again, back up with the relevant analysis to support those claims and support that recommendation. And then finally indicate the impact through the metrics. That's a process that you kind of do. And let's say you have 3 recommendations in your presentation. You would do this loop once for the first recommendation, then you would go back and do it again for the second recommendation, and then you go in and do it again for a third recommendation. So one of the last parts of the case competition is the implementation. So basically at this point, you've done your opening, you've outlined the core issues, you presented your exec summary, you've gone into recommendation 1, you've gone into recommendation 2, you've gone into recommendation 3. Now you're almost done your presentation. One of the last components is the implementation plan. And the implementation plan generally consists of 3 elements. So the first is a timeline, the second is the financials, and then the third is risk and mitigation. So in terms of the timeline, again, I guess a general rule of thumb for the implementation plan is that the judges aren't looking too specifically at this. It's more of just something that they're looking to have a checklist off of. So you don't need to go that in depth into your implementation. It's more so just there to make sure that you've talked about it and thought about how you would actually implement these recommendations. They're not looking too in depth about what you say in this segment. That being said, it's good to have a timeline to kind of action out your 3 recommendations and when each will start, when each will end, and some of the individual steps involved needed to get there. In terms of the financials, this is where you can dive a bit deeper into the overall financial impact. So you kind of have small financial tidbits for each of your recommendations. This is where you kind of combine that information and come up with a solid financial base overall. So if you're to implement all 3 recommendations, what's the impact on the bottom line? How does the company benefit? And there's some like graphs and numbers you can use, but it doesn't have to be too fancy. The third part of the implementation plan is risk and mitigation. So every recommendation comes with some risks, and being able to identify upfront what potentially those risks are, and furthermore come up with a short 1 to 2 sentence on how you would plan on mitigating those risks allows you to show that you've really thought about all the opportunities and all of the potentials with this recommendation, and is highly recommended at the end of your presentation. So after your implementation plan, you do a short conclusion. A lot of the conventions for conclusions are really the same as the openings. Keep it short, keep it concise, package up your presentation nicely, and end. Following the conclusion of your presentation, there's typically some time for Q&A. So the time of Q&A can kind of vary, but there's a few general rules that will apply for every question and answering session. So the first kind of key point is develop a system for answering questions. This is especially important for Zoom because it can be hard to know when your teammates are going to speak about a question. And so internally come up with a way of answering questions. Usually how my teams like to do it is that each of us have generally worked on one piece of the overall presentation. And so we just divide up question and answering based on what we worked on. So let's say if I worked on the financials, any financial questions that come, I'm going to be the one answering. And if Jess, worked on recommendation 1, any questions about recommendation 1, she would answer. By dividing it by that, it's very clear when you should be speaking and when you should not. The second part, and this is actually really, really important, is if someone answers a question from Q&A, don't add on to them. So if there was a question about recommendation 1 and Jess answers it, I'm not going to, once Jess stops talking, I'm not going to go, thanks, Jess, to add on and blah, 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 blah. It makes it sound like your team is uncoordinated and that you're unsure of how to respond. And so just let one person answer per question and don't try to extend it. The last point, and this is something that you may want to do, you may not want to do depending on the case, is develop an appendix. So generally speaking, you'll have a lot of analysis and a lot of other information that you didn't put in your presentation because it didn't fit or it wasn't the most important stuff. You can throw those slides and those information after the presentation in the appendix, and that will really assist you in answering question and answers. For example, if you did more financial analysis and want to walk them through your financial model, or if you have additional risks and mitigations that you want to put in there, you can throw all of that in your appendix and just have it there in case a question is asked about it. So again, the overall structure of a case competition is the following kind of pieces. So remember, the opening, your problem identification, your exec summary, your decision criteria and alternatives, your 3 recommendations, your implementation, then Q&A. And that's kind of an overview of case competitions. that was kind of our case 101 segment. I know that was a lot of information, so I do believe the presentation is being recorded. Do we have any questions? Do we have any questions at this point of time before we go into some more advanced tips?
James, there's some questions in the chat. I can read them out loud for you, and if you or Alex want to answer them, that might
Sure.
help.
That sounds great.
So, okay. So Thomas is asking, do we include references for facts in the appendix?
Great question. So generally speaking, there are two different types of cases. So the first case is an internal case in the sense where you can only use the facts that are given in the casebook. In that sense, you don't need to do any referencing. If the case does allow for external resources and external referencing, what I would recommend is not to put all of your resources in the appendix, but to cite your resources where you present them in your presentation. So for example, in your analysis piece, if you talk about some StatsCan stuff, at the bottom of that StatsCan point or graph or whatever, just put a very small kind of line saying source Stats Canada or Statistics Canada. And that's how you do it. They're not really too picky about references. That's what I would say.
Awesome. So our second question is, what would the financial analysis be based on for the LEAP case? Are we given specific numbers to work with?
Yeah, great question. So again, financials will differ significantly depending on the case and what's provided. Also, I think at this stage, if you're in first year university or in high school, the expectations for financial analysis is very, very low. You haven't really learned any financial analysis tools or any modeling tools. And so don't feel overwhelmed by the numbers. I would say you want to always judge it based off of the case itself. So I'm not too sure about the LEAP case itself, but if there are a lot of numbers presented that you can kind of use and make to determine some things, then use it. Again, financials, generally speaking, judges don't grill too hard on the financials. They just want to see that some numbers are there that roughly give an indication of the impact of this recommendation. They're not really going to grill you on the nitty-gritty of it or how you kind of came up with those numbers. As long as you have some numbers, I would say go ahead with that. But if there are really like zero numbers in the case, then it's probably less of a priority within the case competition.
Awesome. And maybe Alex, you want to take this one? Someone's asking a question about ICCC. Is the club only available to Ivey and AEO, or can anyone from Western join?
For sure. So in terms of the ICCC team structure, we do have different teams, vary from HBA 2 and 3 team as the core team, and following by HBA 1 team and AEO 2 team. So for now, for third and fourth year, it is only available for Ivey students. And in terms of people in second year, like applications are always allowed, and we would not select like AEO2 specifically. So if you're not AEO2 but in second year or looking to apply, like definitely 100%.
Great. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. And with ICCC, I don't know what the breakdown is in this group of Western students and other schools, but for ICCC, we will be hosting external case competitions. We will be partnering with other clubs on campus like we've done with LEAP. So you can find us anywhere, and feel free to just reach out to us online or on Facebook.
Cool. So maybe I'll stop sharing, and Alex, you can share screen so you can present your part.
Sounds good. Could you see my screen? Sounds good. So in addition to this part, for additional tips, we are catering to more on the soft skills rather than on the structure or like the tactics of case competitions. So when it comes to like working in teams and how do you really create the content and delivery, these are some things that you want to pay attention to. So in the beginning, like what really makes a great case or like great case delivery? It really comes down to a good narrative. Everyone loves storytelling and everyone loves to hear stories. And there are two sides of this, how to make a good narrative. So the first one is on your side. You wanted to make sure your case delivery is in a way that is functional, but deliver in a way that is elegant. and you wanted to really identify what the theme of the case is. If you're participating in a marketing case, a finance case, you wanted to like allocate a lot of the time onto that specific area of the case, because that's what the judges are looking to hear. And the other side of the coin is you want to identify your audience. So what would be the risk, like what would be their risk tolerance when they are hearing your recommendations? Do they want to hear some high growth ideas in terms of the something out of the box ideas, or are you looking to something like turnaround strategy, or in terms of like partnerships or M&A? And that's something you really want to pay attention to. So like other than that, like you have to keep in mind that everyone has a different taste like hearing case delivery. Like some put a lot of emphasis on numbers, some people put a lot of emphasis onto your opening, your story, and some people really get caught up with like the idea of product, like customer experience, customer journey. And like there's like in hindsight, like there's just no way that you can know like what the audience are looking for. But the best that you can do is really to just tell a good story, because people love stories, and that establish connections. And when you establish that connection, people are engaged, and when they're engaged, your presentation is just like inherently got better in terms of how you're being perceived. And onto what makes up a good narrative, I can make a little breakdown of the content, the delivery, and how you personify it. So in terms of content, you like the case facts are the base of your solution. So like at some point in the deliverable, like the case facts should kind of diminish, and what it really compensates is like your thoughts, your original insights, and your solutions, because that's what people are signed up for, and that's what people really wanted to hear. So one of the biggest mistakes people make is like they just carry case facts throughout the entire case, and people have a hard time gauging like what is their insight, like literally like what kind of value are they like bringing into the presentation. So like a way to measure this is like, what are something that they probably wouldn't know. So if we are looking to emerging market, you wanted to give some behavioral statistics onto like how are these demographics like. If you are looking to expansion, you wanted to look into competitor behavior, and you want to see like what are some best practices out there, like how are people mitigating it, what are some experience that had attempted but didn't go well. And these are all the things that people really wanted to hear in terms of the analysis part. And moving on, we have the delivery. Am I understanding the problem? What is the goal of each slide, and how they connect with each other? Like it sounds very intuitively, but when it actually comes to practice, when you only have 3 or 4 hours, like you kind of start rushing it, and that's what really messed it up. So be sure that you really take the time to understand like the value chain of the business, of the case, of the of the business that you're consulting, and make sure like you're really identifying the right problem. Because if you put your focus wrong to somewhere else, like that is going to like steer the ship to the wrong way, and the audience, when they first heard the case, like they can easily tell that, oh guys, like you guys look onto somewhere else, not what I was looking for. And the last one is like it's like a little cherry on top, is like how you can personify your presentation so that it stands out. And this is like in the picture there, that was like an internal case that we have done earlier last year. It was on Netflix. So we decided to take those like Netflix icon as part of like an icon to display like her 3 customers, and here our 3 solutions. And that easily caught your attention, and our presentation was memorable in terms of like being structured in a way that is very connected to the audience. So the last bonus point, I believe James touched on it, is that you want it to be really professional. You don't want to come up as a team to your presentation and be like, yeah, like adding on to someone's point and having delays between presentations. You wanted to have like a really smooth transition as of like passing out the slides to James, to Jessica, you wanted to bring that up front and make it obvious. So the next one I want to talk about is time management. So time management, I believe like even at our level, like James, Jess, and I do struggle in time management because every case has a very different dynamic. And that's why it is really important to understand your priorities and limitation. So like try to gear like a focus onto your case and dig into it. Even though like some of the times like there are in some cases it can be very like it has like a very strong breath and it has like so many problems, but you really wanted to like laser focus onto one idea and one problem and do very good at it so that your deliverable can actually deliver value and your presentation can be good in that sense. And the second part is you wanted to identify a focus and connect case facts with circumstantial information. So that only applies when external research are allowed. And but basically this point is referring to people do want you to look up for more information in the industry, not just basing on your entire recommendation based on case facts, because that's just not, I think that's a very good way to like self-differentiate yourself, because most other teams are probably going to use case facts as the bulk of your presentation analysis. And the third part is, I think like there's always this debate on whether we should include like a decision criteria slide. And for ICC, we are strongly for the idea because I think like presenting possible solutions to the judges really have shown that we are thoughtful. We are thoughtful on our criteria and also on potential alternative solutions that we have considered. And the last one is take notes from conversation to make sure details are captured and made available for revisiting. So this is like one thing that I've learned last year, because I've once participated in a case con where we didn't really take notes. Everything was kind of held online like in real time and no one was taking any notes. And as we break off into doing our own deliverable and doing our own slide, there were a lot of misalignment and misconnections. And I have no way to really refer back to the conversation. And at the end of the day, like the presentation didn't go too well. And that's something that I really learned, is to make sure like at the conversation, make sure we have a Google Doc running in the real time. And we really write down the key ideas, the key details on the doc, so everyone is aware and are on the same page for most of the time. And another thing, I think this sounds very simple, but then it is very hard to be self-aware when you're doing any of these things. So no one-man team, no egos, and being transparent with your schedule, like no surprises. I think accountability has a big role in this. Is that you before any case competitions, like inform your teammates that like if I have done XYZ, like please let me know. If you feel like you need to say this, and if you do not think you need to say this, you really wanted to be the person who's cultivating an environment that is very safe for people asking questions, very safe for people giving feedback, and to achieve this, like having like a meeting prior to the case competitions is always like a good thing, just to check and talk about our strengths and weaknesses. So the last thing I want to leave you with is how to come up with great solutions. Like there are cases in telecom, there are cases in retail, financial services, and not everyone is like super good in these industries, right? And when you're so fresh to this industry, it might be very difficult for you to come up with solutions. So there are three, for us, that we have, I can say like 3 buckets of ways that you can do it. So the first one is real world examples. So if you are, let's say like consulting a big bank in Toronto, and you really wanted to see what the other big banks are doing, what are something that they're known for, what are some brand campaigns that they have launched that were successful, and what are their value propositions, and how are they better or worse than us. And also you wanted to look into beyond Canada, obviously, right? You wanted to look into maybe in Southeast Asia, a lot of fintech neobanks, what have they been doing, how they were able to like take our market share and see if we can mimic the behavior in a way to protect our circumstances. And that's just like an example, right? Like you can replicate that strategy by looking around in literally every single case that you do. Unless it is like space exploration, then I've got no clue. So the second bucket is first principle. So first principle thinking is often comes down very granularly. You would do a lot of these when you do transformation case, when you do cost cutting case, is that you wanted to look into the business as a whole and really like unfold every part of the business and be like, is there something that I can do here? Is there something I can add here? And also, what is something that I can subtract here? I know in case there is a norm of additive measures. So people just try adding stuff on top of things. But in the same time, you can put that aside and think about what are some ineffective measures that were in place that we could remove it. And that like things like these can easily captures audience attention too, because most people pitch like an additive measures when you can come in and be the person who says like, maybe there's something wrong with this that we can remove it, or we can renovate it, or we can replace it with something. And that would be another solution too. And the last one is perspectives. I think it comes back to the team, is that you really wanted to have a great discussion with your team. And most of the time, when I was like in first and second year, I was always in the team. I was the person who's not speaking, but maybe I have some thoughts. And there was like a person who asked me about my thoughts, and I kind of poured out. I thought it might be dumb, but it actually was useful. I believe like great conversations really adds up like different elements of each people's thoughts together. And in that sense, you were able to build something that is very unique to your team, because that solution combines 4 people's thought together instead of just like one, maybe like the smartest person team's thoughts. So yeah, I will leave you from here. And does anyone have any questions on any part of the case, whether it's a narrative, whether it's structure, whether it's time management, whether it's how to come with great solutions, and any questions about like our own case experience would be fine too.
So it doesn't seem like anyone has any questions. Oh, sorry, we just got one here. What would you say is the worst mistake anyone could make when presenting a case?
To me, I would say adding up to someone else's answer is a pretty huge mistake, because like James mentioned, like it really breaks how people see it, team chemistry that is present in your team. Because when you spoke over other people's opinion, and especially when what you say has a different meaning than the previous person, and that's like the biggest no for me. That was like the worst experience that I could ever imagine in case competitions.
Awesome. And then there's another question here. Are there specific PowerPoint slide tips you have for professional looking presentations?
For sure. Less is always more. That's my suggestion, is that a lot of times like professional slide, as you can see, like our slide here, like there are no like very magical shapes or whatever. Like they're just like simple lines that differentiate the header, the title, and we have a line bottom with our logo and like the theme of the deck. So I think the biggest thing that you want to pay attention to is like, what is the purpose of that slide? And you really wanted to have one central theme for each slide rather than 3, because that really messes everything up. And when we present, or when you present like any deliverable to someone who have not worked on the deck, the first 3 seconds they look to the slide, they already have an impression of the team. Like where am I supposed to be looking at? Like what is the idea of the slide? You wanted to like have you like click as soon as possible, and that's very critical and instrumental.
Yeah, and another, I guess, PowerPoint slide tip. I know for beginners, I used Slides Go or Slides Carnival. They're easiest because they have the templates there. But what's really key is if you section off your slide to have different sections, and when you present, especially in a virtual setting, you can be like on the left here, and you start talking about the left. So you kind of guide their eyes, and then you talk about, okay, the second half, which is presented on the right, and then you talk about what's there. So we have another question. James, feel free to answer as well. Suppose that you are asked a question by the judge that you don't know how to answer to. How should you respond?
Yeah, so I would say that I've gotten quite good at coming up with answers on the fly. I think that's an innate skill that you develop by just doing lots of case competitions. Hopefully, if you are someone that doesn't know how to answer it, someone else will know on your team. Typically, that's what ends up happening. But if, let's say, after 3 or 4 seconds, no one is coming off mute in the Zoom call to answer, I would say there's a few things and a few strategies that you could deploy to be successful. So the first is to be honest, say that, given the constraints of the case, we haven't fully explored this option, and then go into kind of a mitigation strategy where you say, that being said, based on this piece of analysis, we can maybe extrapolate, or we could presume that this would have this impact, right? So, don't try and necessarily brush it off and say like, what's going to happen. Admit that you haven't explored the full collective opportunities within that question, but kind of revert then to something that you do know and kind of use that to explain and answer the question, if that makes sense.
How do we find case competitions to participate in? I can take this one. So case competitions, I would suggest looking on either our Facebook page. Sometimes we post external case competitions, even doing a quick Facebook search, case competitions, and you'll find a bunch of like other schools like U of T, Queens, McMaster. I feel like all of them do have their own little case competitions. You can even do a quick Google search. That's what I found to be useful. Talk to the people within your own school who do case competitions, ask them for advice. Another quick tip is looking on people's LinkedIns and seeing what they've done in the past and seeing if that case competition is an annual thing, and you can sign up for those. Awesome. Is that all the questions that we have? If so, that is all from us. If you guys have any more follow-up questions, feel free to message us on Facebook, message our ICCC page on Facebook. That works as well. And yeah, I hope you guys have an amazing case competition experience with LEAP.